Welcome back. So we just talked about pOH and pH a little bit, and now we're going to move on to talk about buffering. And so this is really the biologically relevant piece of this section in terms of pH and pOH and buffering. Cells cannot tolerate, most cells cannot tolerate significant changes in the proton concentration or hydroxide ion concentration, and so there must be mechanisms in cells which help to control the pH and the pOH by influence there. So those mechanisms basically fall into a category of buffering systems. So buffering system or buffers basically regulate the proton concentration in solution. So on this slide here, you can see I've got proton in square brackets. If you see square brackets, that tends to mean concentration. So buffers basically are a way of making sure that your cells can regulate changes in pH. So as the pH drops, then the buffer would bring the pH back up again. If the pH up, there's a dog. As the pH goes up, the buffer would push it back down. So it keeps it in this steady, stable state. And so this is an example of homeostasis. And so the example we're going to look at biologically is ketoacidosis, and this is when you basically end up with an acidification of the blood and tissues due to the production of something called ketone bodies. And so there are a variety of ways that the ketone bodies can be produced. Alcoholics, chronic alcoholics produce ketone bodies, and that can interfere with the blood pH, and so can diabetics as they stop processing sugar and start breaking fat down. So you don't have to worry about what ketone bodies are, but in ketoacidosis is what happens is you get a high concentration of ketone bodies dumped into the blood, and so these ketone bodies are being produced metabolically, variety of mechanisms you don't need to worry about, and they get dumped into the blood. Now the thing is, ketone bodies are acidic, they're an acid, so when you put them into water, they lose a proton, and that causes the proton concentration to change. So let's do a quick question just to make sure you're okay with acidity and our discussion of pH from the last 2 times ago. So here's a question, see how you get on with this. Okay, so hopefully you got that one right. If not, maybe go back and check out the video on pH. So, is what blood buffering does is it restores the pH. So your blood is usually around pH 7.62 or something. You have to memorize that. You'll probably want to, but you don't have to. Don't waste your time doing that kind of thing. And so when you get little perturbations, little changes away from 7.62 in the blood, a buffering system, a mechanism which allows the pH to be pushed back close to what it was. So if this is 7.62 and the pH goes down a little bit, then the blood buffering system brings it back up, and if it goes up a little bit too high, the blood buffering system pushes it back down. So just to summarize that really quickly, if pH drops, then blood buffering pushes the pH back up. So when I say pH drops, I mean the pH goes from 7.6 to maybe 7.5. The blood buffering system is going to push the pH back up, so the number gets bigger, up to 7.6. Now, if the pH goes up, so let's say it goes to 7.7 or 7.75, the blood buffering system is going to push the pH back down again. So all these, it's not a straight line, it's these fluctuations. Okay, and so homeostasis is about controlling something within limits, and so there's always going up, coming down, going up, coming down. So there's always this kind of oscillation around a kind of steady straight line, if you like. Okay, so here's what the blood buffering system does. It revolves around the molecule in the middle here, which is carbonic acid. So what happens is that carbon dioxide over here on the left can combine with water, and when you combine carbon dioxide and water, you get carbonic acid. Now that's an acid, so what it does is if you put the acid in water, it will dissociate, and so what you end up getting is this proton and bicarbonate. And so if we push this reaction from the left over to the right, then what happens is the proton concentration goes up. So now the proton concentration is going up. What's the pH doing? It's coming down, so the pH number will be dropping down, 7.6, 7.5, that kind of thing. Okay, so how does this reaction go to the right from the left? So how does it go from left to right as we've got it drawn here? Well, if the carbon dioxide concentration goes up, so if you've got a lot of carbon dioxide in your blood, or you've got a lot of ketones or something like that, then that's going to push it towards the acidic side. But in terms of this equation here, if you've got a lot of carbon dioxide, the carbon dioxide will combine with the water. it'll produce carbonic acid, and then carbonic acid will dissociate to release a proton, and it's what we call conjugate base bicarbonate. So this thing goes in the other way as well. So this reaction runs backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards, and it's at an equilibrium. So it's always going to be at a certain point. And so to get it to go the other way, if we increase the concentration of bicarbonate, which your body can do, or we find that the proton concentration goes up, let's just say the proton concentration goes up and the pH has dropped a little bit. So what happens is that the bicarbonate concentration will go up, and these two things will combine, and they will form carbonic acid. Now, if these two things are high, then the reaction's driven to the left, and you get carbon dioxide. So you actually get more carbon dioxide produced in your breath if your blood pH drops, because the reaction's pushed to the left. Now, if the pH of blood goes up, then it's going to be pulled to the right. And so this is going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. Okay, so what's going to happen here is if the pH is low, so that means the pH has dropped from 7.6, let's say to 7.5. Now, so what's going to happen is, what that means is the proton concentration has gone up. Remember, the pH has dropped, so the proton concentration has gone up. So the proton concentration has gone up. It will combine, the protons will combine with bicarbonate. You'll get carbonic acid, which will dissociate into carbon dioxide and water. The reaction's driven in that direction towards the left because of the high concentration of protons. So that's what happens if the pH is low. And so if the pH is low, there are too many protons, and so the bicarbonate acts like a sponge. It kind of absorbs them, and that causes the proton concentration to drop, and the pH goes back up again. And the reverse is true. If we have the pH being too high, that means there aren't enough protons, and we've got to release protons to get the concentration of protons up and drop the pH. Is what will happen is carbon dioxide will combine with water. Your respiration rate will actually go up a little bit, and so you'll get more carbon dioxide in your blood. Carbonic acid will form, and then protons will be released, and so that will lower the pH. So you've got to keep in mind that a low pH is a high proton concentration. If you mix that up when you're looking at this blood buffering system, you can immediately get this the wrong way around. So you've got to keep that in mind. So let's do a couple of questions here. These are hard questions, so see how you get on with these. Here's the first one. Okay, and here's the second one. This one's a little bit tricky. This one's a lot of people like this question, but it's a little bit tricky. You've got to think about this one hard, so see how you get on. Okay, now there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's kind of in the chapter of your book, and what you need to know from that chapter, some of it's in my lectures, some of it's in my video captures, my video recordings here, but then there's some other stuff in the learning outcomes, and that's going to be stuff you've got to look up in your book, chat with your classmates, do some research online in Google, that kind of stuff. And so the answer to your question, what's going to be on the quiz, that's in the learning outcomes. It's not just based on what's on these video captures, on these video lectures. Okay, so make sure you check out the learning outcomes, make sure you can answer all of those, and when you're in those, make sure you focus on the behavioral verb, which is at the start of the statement. So if it says describe, you're describing. If it says explain, you're demonstrating you understand how or why something is happening. If it says calculate, you better be able to do a calculation, because that's the kind of question you're going to get in the quiz. Okay, so check out the learning outcomes, and that's the end of this complete set of material, and I'll see you next time when we start talking about some organic chemistry.